BP's annual meeting in London has been disrupted by climate protesters and a shareholder revolt.
Some of the UK's biggest pension funds are angry over the energy giant's move to roll back its targets for reducing emissions. The chairman, Helge Lund, told investors that BP will push ahead with its green energy transition, but not in a forced way. Shareholders brought forward a resolution to try and force the oil giant to align its targets with the Paris Climate Accord and commit to total carbon emission cuts by the year 2030.
Well, Christof Ruehl is a senior research scholar at Columbia University's Centre on Global Energy Policy. He was also a former chief economist for BP. Welcome, Christof. So BP has watered down its climate goals, making plenty of shareholders angry, as well as pension funds that invest in BP. They brought forward a resolution to change all that, but will that anger make any difference to BP?
Well, it's always difficult to serve two masters, and I think there is probably a majority of shareholders quite happy with adjusting the pace of this transition. And there's a very vocal, but still a very, I think, strong minority of shareholders very unhappy with that slowdown. And the pension funds you mentioned are part of that. According to the numbers I've seen, they own about 0.5%, so half a percentage of BP shares. So we can say that the noise and the importance is not necessarily in line. But the bigger question, of course, in the background is, why is BP doing this? And I think it is probably a sensible thing to do. They do it because they recognize that the energy transition cannot proceed as fast as people have thought, and is not as easy as people have thought. And that just has to be taken into account. And part of the problem is that for many years to come, it will require oil and gas. And if Western big producers like BP back away too fast from this, it will still be produced just in other parts of the world by other players. Question is whether that is more sensible, or it's more sensible to adjust the pace. I think maybe more sensible to adjust the pace.
Well, as you say, some shareholders perhaps happy with the adjustment of the pace of this clean energy transition, because this all comes amid BP's record profits, doesn't it? And shareholders perhaps would be quite keen to see record profits.
Exactly. So there you have the other part. So to speak, the silent majority of shareholders must still be people who invested consciously in an oil and gas company and want to see oil and gas being produced, in particular if that happens in years of very high prices and then short profits are very high as well. Don't forget, though, that oil and gas production is a long-term business, and you have to look through the cycle. You have some years with stellar profits and enormous cash flows and share buybacks and all of that, and then you have some other years with not much funding where you have to borrow to keep your investment going. So there are both sides to that. One shouldn't get too overly excited. But it remains true that one of the things the energy crisis and the unpleasant war in the Ukraine have taught us is that fossil fuels are still needed, and in times of a crisis, of security problems, they're needed even more when their prices shoot up. And those investors who have consciously invested, some of them years or decades ago, in an oil and gas company, of course, will be very happy about that. And probably some of them reluctant to change to more modern times and to scale down the oil and gas business, as BP has promised to do.
Christof, good to talk to you. Thank you for joining us. That's Christof Ruehl from Columbia University.
Always a pleasure.